12 years into our marriage, Daniel told me he was leaving me for his boss. What he didn't know was that I owned the company and I was about to fire them both. The look on Veronica Stone's face when she realized the anonymous investor she had been working with was the wife she helped ruin absolutely priceless. But before we dive back into this, tell me where you're tuning in from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow I've got something even more special waiting for you. The champagne bubbles tickled my nose as I raised my glass toward the hilltop view. The city lights shining like scattered diamonds below our home in Maple Ridge. Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder as we stood on our living room terrace. To another successful season, he murmured, his warm breath against my ear. Sterling Digital wouldn't have made it without you cheering me on. I leaned back into his embrace, watching the distant glow of Central City turn the night sky into soft amber hues. If someone had told me that this night would be one of our last peaceful moments together, I would have laughed. Daniel and I had built what everyone thought was the perfect marriage. It's 10 years of shared dreams, inside jokes, and a partnership. That made other couples jealous at dinner parties. What they didn't see was the carefully constructed foundation under our success. While Daniel climbed the corporate ladder at Sterling Digital Solutions, I had been quietly building my own empire through Coastal Capital Partners, a financial group I co-founded with Martin Reynolds right after we graduated with our MBAs. The group had grown beyond our expectations, managing portfolios worth tens of millions and holding major shares in dozens of companies across California. Daniel knew I worked in finance, of course, but he had never bothered to learn the details. When the topic came up, his eyes would glaze over with polite disinterest as if my job wasn't nearly as important as his. He saw me as the supportive wife with a nice career on the side, not the woman whose investment decisions could make or break entire companies. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. 3 years earlier, when Sterling Digital had struggled to secure the funding it needed for expansion, I was the anonymous investor who saved the company. Through a cleverly structured deal using my shell company, Unholdings LLC, I had bought a major share in Sterling Digital. Daniel celebrated this mysterious investor as his career savior, never realizing that the person he was sleeping next to every night was the one pulling the strings. I preferred it that way. The anonymity allowed me to make business decisions without the complications of personal relationships. Martin handled most of the day-to-day dealings with our portfolio companies, while I remained a shadowy figure behind the scenes. This setup protected both my marriage and my business interests, allowing me to work in a world where being underestimated was often my greatest advantage. That night in April, Daniel was riding high on the success of a major campaign he had led for Sterling Digital's biggest customer. His new role as Senior Marketing Director came with a significant bonus, and more importantly to him, a prestigious reputation within the corporate world of Central City. He had always been driven by the desire to be recognized, to be seen as important and successful. It was one of the things that first drew me to him's hungry ambition, matched my own. Victoria wants to take the team to that new bistro downtown next week, Daniel said, refilling our glasses. La Petite Bistro, I think it's called. A celebration dinner for landing the Morrison account. Veronica Stone, the CEO who had taken over the company when her father retired 3 years ago, had caught my attention during quarterly reports and board meetings I attended under my corporate identity. She was sharp, ambitious, and exactly what Sterling Digital needed. She was also stunningly beautiful, though I tried not to notice that detail during our brief encounters at industry events, where I appeared as myself, not as the hidden Unholdings representative. That sounds great, I replied, genuinely happy for his success. You've worked so hard on that account. Daniel's phone buzzed on the bedside table, and I saw him tense slightly before reaching for it. A quick glance at the screen, then he silenced it without reading the message. Work? I asked Veronica, confirming some details from Monday's presentation. He said quickly, But something in his tone felt off. Nothing that can't wait until morning. Looking back, that was probably the first real crack in our perfect facade. The phone calls that came at odd hours, always from Veronica. The late meetings that seemed to stretch longer each week. The way Daniel's attention had become divided, as if part of him was always somewhere else, even when he was sitting right next to me. But that night, wrapped in the warmth of his arms and the glow of his latest achievement, I pushed those concerns aside. Successful people worked hard, I told myself. Veronica was a demanding boss, and Daniel was proving himself worthy of even greater responsibilities. The capital injection I'd made in Sterling Tech was paying dividends, not just financially, but in my husband's career satisfaction. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of social events. Celebrating Daniel's new position, dinner parties at the golf club, networking events downtown, exhibition hall openings where Central City's top professionals gathered to see and be seen. Daniel thrived in these environments, charming clients and colleagues with the easy confidence that had first caught my attention at a charity auction 12 years ago. I played my role perfectly, the supportive wife who asked thoughtful questions and remembered everyone's names. What most people didn't realize was that I often knew more about their businesses than they suspected, through Coastal Capital's extensive investment assets. I had my fingers on the pulse of Central City's entire commercial network, the art gallery owner whose mortgage we held, the restaurant chain we'd helped expand, the tech startup we'd funded. In its early days, moved through these events like a secret agent in plain sight. Natasha's got such a good head for business, Daniel would tell people, his arm around my waist. Always asking the smart questions. I'm lucky to have her insights. The condescending tone stung more than he knew. Daniel genuinely believed he was giving me a compliment, but his words revealed how little he understood about my actual capabilities. In his mind, I was a clever amateur offering helpful suggestions, not a professional whose investment strategies had generated returns that dwarfed his annual salary. One evening in late March, we attended a mixer for Central City Business Journal's 40 Under 40 honorees. Daniel had been nominated but didn't make the final list, a disappointment he'd been carrying with obvious frustration. Veronica Stone, however, had not only made the list but was featured on the cover, photographed in a power pose against the Central City skyline. She deserves it, Daniel said as we studied the magazine showcased near the entrance. Veronica's transformed that company. The profits increase since she took over has been incredible. I nodded, knowing exactly how incredible. As the company's primary investor, I received detailed financial reports that showed just how successfully Veronica had executed the expansion plan I'd funded. She was brilliant, no question about it. She was also standing across the room in a stunning black dress that hugged her curves perfectly, drawing admiring glances from half the men in attendance. Should we go congratulate her? I suggested, partly from genuine professional respect, and partly from curiosity about the woman who had been consuming so much of my husband's time and attention. We made our way through the crowd, past clusters of Central City's rising business stars, nursing craft cocktails, and discussing market trends. Veronica was holding court near the bar, surrounded by admirers, but somehow maintaining an air of approachable authority that I had to admire. "Daniel!" she exclaimed when she spotted us, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "And you must be Natasha. I've heard so much about you." Her handshake was firm, her smile radiant, and her attention seemed completely focused on our conversation, despite the crowd clamoring for her time. I could see why Daniel spoke of her with such admiration. She possessed that rare combination of competence and charisma that made natural leaders. "Congratulations on the recognition," I said, "though from what I understand, it's well-deserved. Sterling Tech's growth has been impressive." "Thank you." Though honestly, I couldn't have done it without team members like Daniel. His creative vision has been instrumental in our success. The way she looked at him when she said it made something cold settle in my stomach. There was warmth there, yes, but also something more intimate than professional appreciation. Daniel's response was equally telling, a slight flush of pride and pleasure that went beyond career satisfaction. "We should let you get back to your admirers," I said quickly, suddenly eager to escape the magnetic pull of their obvious connection. "Of course, but we should all get dinner soon," Veronica replied. "I've been meaning to meet the woman who keeps our star director so grounded and happy." As we walked away, Daniel was practically glowing. "See what I mean? She's incredible. The way she thinks strategically, how she can see opportunities others miss. Working for her has been the best thing that's ever happened to my career." The enthusiasm in his voice was unmistakable. And it wasn't just about business anymore. Daniel had always been driven by success, but this was different. This was personal admiration bordering on infatuation. And the realization hit me like a physical blow. That night, as Daniel slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what I'd witnessed. It's the woman I'd been anonymously funding, whose business success I'd made possible, was stealing my husband's heart. The capital injection that was supposed to secure our financial future was threatening to destroy our marriage. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Sterling Tech's recent financial reports, looking at them with new eyes. The company was thriving, yes, but Veronica's leadership style was creating a culture where long hours and intense dedication were not just expected but celebrated. Daniel wasn't just working late because the job demanded it. He was working late because he wanted to impress her, to prove himself worthy of her attention and approval. The next morning brought the first direct confrontation with the reality I'd been avoiding. Daniel's phone rang during breakfast. Veronica's name flashed on the screen. Instead of the quick professional conversations I was used to overhearing, this call stretched on for 20 minutes. Daniel's voice was animated, punctuated by laughter that sounded more intimate than professional. "Sorry about that," he said when he finally hung up. Veronica had some ideas about the Henderson proposal that she wanted to run by me. On a Saturday morning, I asked, trying to keep my tone light. You know how she is. When inspiration strikes, she acts on it. It's what makes her such an effective leader. I watched him finish his coffee, noting the way his eyes lit up when he talked about her ideas, the energy that seemed to radiate from him. Whenever her name came up, preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. This wasn't just professional admiration anymore. Daniel was falling in love with his boss, and he either didn't realize it or didn't care enough to hide it. The following weeks brought a parade of warning signs that I could no longer ignore. Daniel's grooming habits changed subtly. Better cologne, more attention to his appearance, a new gym membership that he actually used. Our dinner conversations increasingly centered around Veronica's latest initiatives, her insights, her vision for the company's future. When I tried to steer discussions toward our own plans or interests, Daniel's attention would drift, his responses becoming more punctuated. The final piece of evidence came during a dinner party at our neighbors. The Chens, Tommy Chen had mentioned seeing Daniel and Veronica at the Continental Club the previous Thursday, sharing what looked like an intimate conversation over drinks, probably talking business, Tommy had said with a knowing smile. Though they seemed pretty engrossed in each other, Daniel's explanation later was smooth and reasonable. A client had canceled a meeting, leaving them both with unexpected free time. Veronica had suggested they use the opportunity to strategize about the upcoming quarterly review. Nothing inappropriate, just two colleagues making productive use of an unexpected break in their schedules. But I knew my husband well enough to recognize the signs, the slight defensiveness in his tone, the way he avoided eye contact when explaining, and the unnecessary detail that suggested a rehearsed story. Daniel was having an affair, at least moving steadily toward one, and he was doing it with a woman whose company I secretly owned. The irony was almost laughable. I had funded Veronica's success, enabled her rise to power, and now she was using that position to seduce my husband. The capital injection I'd made to secure our future was becoming the instrument of our destruction, and Daniel, oblivious to the web of connections around him, was walking blindly toward a betrayal that would cost him far more than he could possibly imagine. As I lay awake another night, listening to Daniel's peaceful breathing, beside me, I realized that our perfect life had been an illusion all along. The success, the harmony, the shared dreams, all of it built on foundations of secrecy and misunderstanding that were finally beginning to crumble. Soon I would have to decide whether to fight for what we'd built or prepare for the inevitable collapse. What Daniel didn't know was that when the collapse came, I would be the one controlling how far and how hard he fell. The anonymous investor he'd never bothered to learn was about to become the most important person in his life, and not in the way he'd ever imagined. The text message arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office. Daniel had left for work an hour earlier, kissing my cheek with the distracted air of a man whose thoughts were already elsewhere. The message was from Rachel Kim, my best friend since law school and now one of Central City's most respected divorce attorneys. Coffee? Something we need to discuss. Rachel never used that tone unless something serious was brewing. I agreed to meet her at Josephine House. It's a quiet spot in East Central City where we could talk without running into anyone from Daniel's professional circle. The drive gave me time to prepare myself for whatever bomb Rachel was about to drop, though nothing could have readied me for the devastating precision of her revelation. She was already seated when I arrived, her usually immaculate appearance somehow subdued. Rachel had built her reputation on being unflappable in the face of messy divorces and bitter custody battles, but today she looked genuinely uncomfortable. I've been debating whether to tell you this for weeks. She began without preamble. But as your friend, I can't stay quiet anymore. She slid her phone across the table, showing me a series of photographs that made my blood run cold. Daniel and Veronica at various locations around Central City, their body language telling a story I'd been desperately trying not to read. Outside the Driscoll Hotel, sharing an intimate dinner at a restaurant I didn't recognize. Walking hand in hand through Zilker Park. The final image showed them kissing in the parking lot of Sterling Tech's office building. These were taken by a private investigator, Rachel said quietly. Another client hired him to follow her cheating husband, and he happened to capture your Daniel in the background. When he realized who it was, he brought the photos to me. I stared at the images, feeling strangely detached from my own devastation. Part of me had known this was coming, had seen the signs accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon. But knowing and seeing were entirely different experiences. The visual proof transformed suspicion into crushing reality. How long? I managed to ask. Based on the timestamps, at least 6 weeks. It's probably longer. Rachel's voice was gentle but professional. Natasha, I'm so sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I scrolled through the photos again, noting the easy intimacy between Daniel and Veronica. They looked like a couple who'd been together for months, not weeks. The way she leaned into him, the protective way his arm curved around her shoulders. The obvious joy on both their faces, it was everything our marriage had been lacking. For longer than I'd wanted to admit. What are you going to do? Rachel asked. The question hung in the air while I processed not just the betrayal, but the complex web of implications surrounding it. Daniel was having an affair with the CEO of the company I owned. Veronica was using her position of power to seduce my husband while benefiting from my anonymous investment. The situation was so tangled that I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I need to think, I said finally. This is more complicated than it appears. Rachel raised an eyebrow but didn't press. She knew me well enough to recognize when I was operating in strategic mode rather than emotional crisis. We'd been friends long enough for her to understand. that my first instinct was always to gather information and consider all angles before making any moves. The drive home was a blur of Central City traffic and racing thoughts. I kept seeing those photographs, the happiness on Daniel's face that he hadn't shown me in months. When had I stopped being the person who brought him joy? When had our marriage become something he wanted to escape rather than cherish? The time I reached Maple Ridge Drive, I'd made my first decision. I would not confront Daniel immediately. Instead, I would observe, document, and prepare. If this marriage was ending, I would control how and when it happened. More importantly, I would ensure that I understood every aspect of the situation before revealing my hand. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual, claiming he'd been stuck in a strategy session that ran long. His explanation was smooth and believable, delivered with the practiced ease of someone who'd been lying consistently for weeks. He seemed relaxed, almost cheerful, the tension I'd noticed in recent months replaced by an energy that I now understood came from his secret romance. "How was your day?" asked, loosening his tie as he headed toward the kitchen. "Productive," I replied, watching him carefully. "Rachel and I had coffee. She mentioned seeing you downtown yesterday." The slightest pause in his movements. "So brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it." "Oh, where?" I asked. "Near the Driscoll," he said, his tone casual. "She said you were with someone from work." "Probably Veronica," he added easily. "We had a client lunch that ran late, so we walked around downtown afterward to discuss the presentation. Fresh air helps her think." The lie rolled off his tongue effortlessly. I marveled at how naturally deception came to him when it served his purposes. This was a side of Daniel I'd never seen before, and it made me question how well I'd ever really known him. "She seems very dedicated," I observed. "She is," Daniel replied. "That's what makes her such an effective leader. She's willing to put in the extra time and effort to get things right." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. Veronica was indeed putting in extra effort, just not the kind that would benefit Sterling Tech's shareholders. She was systematically destroying the personal life of her company's primary investor, while conducting her affair under the guise of professional dedication. Over the following days, I began my own investigation. Using my access to Sterling Tech's financial records and employee communications, I started building a timeline of Daniel and Veronica's relationship. What I discovered was both more extensive and more calculating than I'd imagined. The affair had begun almost immediately after Veronica took over as CEO. Their first documented interaction outside of normal business occurred just 3 weeks after her promotion, a dinner that was supposedly to discuss Daniel's role in the company's expansion plans. From there, the meetings had become more frequent and more personal, always carefully disguised as business necessities. What disturbed me most was the pattern of manipulation I uncovered. Veronica had systematically isolated Daniel from his colleagues, creating special projects that required him to work directly with her. She'd restructured his responsibilities to increase his dependence on her approval and guidance. She'd even arranged for him to travel with her to conferences where their hotel accommodations were suspiciously coordinated. This wasn't a spontaneous romance that had developed naturally between two colleagues. This was a calculated seduction, executed with the precision of a corporate takeover. Veronica had identified Daniel as a target and pursued him with the same strategic thinking she applied to business ventures. The realization filled me with cold fury as Sterling Tech's anonymous owner. I'd trusted Veronica to run the company with integrity and professionalism. Instead, she was using her position to conduct personal affairs that created liability and compromised the business environment. Worse, she was doing it with complete disregard for the fact that her actions were destroying an investor's marriage. But my anger was equally directed at Daniel. He wasn't an innocent victim in this scenario. He was a married man who'd chosen to betray his vows for the thrill of an affair with his younger, more successful boss. The Daniel I'd thought I knew would have been horrified by such behavior. This Daniel was apparently capable of compartmentalizing his ethics when it suited his desires. As I dug deeper into the company's communications, I discovered another disturbing element. Veronica had been subtly undermining other employees who might pose competition for Daniel's attention or advancement. Two promising marketing directors had been transferred to less desirable positions after showing too much familiarity with Daniel during team meetings. A talented female executive had been passed over for promotion after Veronica expressed concerns about her team fit. Veronica was reshaping the entire company culture to support her relationship with Daniel, creating an environment where her personal desires took precedence over business objectives. It was exactly the kind of leadership failure that could destroy a company's value and expose investors to a significant liability. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Marcus Reynolds called me one afternoon. I spoke with Marcus Reynolds about concerns regarding Sterling Tech's recent performance metrics. As my partner in Coastal Capital, he monitored our portfolio companies for any signs of trouble that might require intervention. "Something's off about Sterling Tech," he said without preamble. "The numbers look good on the surface, but there are some troubling patterns in the employee satisfaction surveys and productivity metrics." "What kind of patterns?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Declining morale, increased turnover in key departments, complaints about favoritism, and unclear promotion criteria, the kind of issues that suggest leadership problems at the top level." Marcus was identifying from an objective business perspective the same problems I had uncovered through my personal investigation. Veronica's affair with Daniel wasn't just destroying my marriage. It was compromising the company's effectiveness and threatening the value of my investment. "Should we schedule a board meeting?" Marcus continued. "There are serious management issues. We need to address them before they impact our returns." "Not yet," I said carefully. "Let me do some additional research first. I want to understand the full scope of the problem before we take any action." That evening, I sat in my home office, staring at the evidence I'd accumulated. Bank records showing Daniel's increased spending on restaurants and hotels. Company communications revealing the preferential treatment he'd been receiving. Photographs documenting their public displays of affection and a pattern of business decisions that prioritized personal relationships over professional obligations. The betrayal was complete and undeniable. Daniel had not only cheated on me, he'd done it in a way that threatened everything I'd worked to build. The company I'd saved was being mismanaged by a CEO who prioritized her love life over her fiduciary responsibilities. The husband I'd supported was using his position to conduct an affair that could expose both our personal finances and my business interests to significant risk. But perhaps most insulting of all was the casual arrogance with which they'd conducted their relationship. Neither Daniel nor Veronica had shown any concern for discretion or consequences. They'd pursued their affair with the confidence of people who believed they were untouchable, that their actions existed in a vacuum, without impact on others. They had no idea that the wife they dismissed as irrelevant was actually the person with the power to end both their careers and their relationship. They'd underestimated me completely, assuming that I was nothing more than a supportive spouse with no real influence or resources of my own. As I closed the files and powered down my computer, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but they were being overshadowed by something colder and more focused. Daniel and Veronica had made their choices based on the assumption that I was powerless to stop them. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Rachel, asking her to begin preparing divorce papers, but to keep them confidential until I was ready to proceed. The second was to Marcus, requesting that he compile a comprehensive review of Veronica's performance as CEO, with particular attention to any decisions that might compromise the company's value or create legal liability. Daniel left for work that morning with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to be home for dinner. He had no idea that his wife was already 3 steps ahead of him, preparing to dismantle the carefully constructed deception that had consumed our marriage. The anonymous investor he'd never bothered to learn about was about to become the most important person in his life. The betrayal was complete. But the consequences were just beginning. The revelation came during a routine Wednesday morning call with Patricia Walsh, Coastal Capital's corporate attorney. I'd asked her to review Sterling Tech's recent corporate governance decisions, ostensibly as part of our standard portfolio oversight. What she discovered changed everything I thought I knew about my position in this unfolding disaster. Natasha, we need to talk immediately. Patricia's voice carried an urgency I'd rarely heard from the unflappable lawyer. Can you come too? My office this morning. There's something about the Sterling Tech situation that you need to see in person. It's an hour later. I sat across from Patricia's mahogany desk while she spread out a series of legal documents that made my pulse quicken. The woman who'd guided me through countless complex business deals over the past decade wore an expression of barely contained excitement mixed with professional concern. I've been reviewing Sterling Tech's corporate structure, as you requested. She began adjusting her reading glasses. And I discovered something rather extraordinary about your position as majority shareholder through Unholdings. She pointed to a specific clause buried ... deep in the company's charter. Documents language so technical that I'd missed its significance during my original investment review. Found the provision that gave the majority shareholder the right to call for an immediate review of executive performance based on conduct that could compromise company assets or create legal liability. My heart began racing as Patricia continued her explanation. More importantly, there's a morality clause here that specifically addresses relationships between executives and employees. If the CEO engages in conduct that creates a hostile work environment or exposes the company to harassment liability, the majority shareholder can initiate immediate removal proceedings. The implications hit me like lightning. Veronica's affair with Daniel wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a clear violation of corporate governance standards that gave me the legal right to remove her from her position. As the anonymous owner of Sterling Tech, I had the power to end both their careers and their relationship with a single board resolution. There's more, Patricia continued, pulling out another document. The executive compensation agreements include clawback provisions for misconduct. If Veronica is removed for cause, forfeits not only her severance package, but also her stock options and performance bonuses dating back to years. We're talking about approximately $4 million. I stared at the documents, processing the magnitude of what Patricia had uncovered. The legal framework already existed to destroy Veronica's career and financial security. All I needed was documentation of the misconduct, which I already possessed in abundance. What about Daniel? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. As a direct report engaging in an inappropriate relationship with his supervisor, he'd be terminated for cause as well. No severance, no benefits continuation. And his non-compete clause would remain in effect, essentially blacklisting him from the Central City marketing industry for 18 months. The power I'd been unknowingly holding was breathtaking. With the right legal strategy, I could eliminate both Daniel and Veronica from their professional positions while reclaiming control of the company they'd been mismanaging. The anonymous investor they'd ignored and dismissed was actually the person who controlled their professional destinies. Patricia, I need you to prepare 2 sets of documents, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. First, a formal board resolution, calling for CEO review based on the evidence we've discussed. Second, documentation of the hostile work environment claim, including the pattern of favoritism and retaliation against other employees and the timeline for implementation. I considered the question carefully. The nuclear option Patricia had outlined would devastate both Daniel and Veronica immediately, but timing would be crucial for maximum impact. I wanted them to understand not just that they were being punished, but exactly who was administering that punishment and why. I want everything ready to execute, but held in reserve until I determine the optimal moment. I decided this isn't just about legal compliance, it's about justice. Patricia nodded with the grim satisfaction of a lawyer who appreciated elegant strategy. I'll have preliminary documents ready by Friday. And Natalie, what you're planning is completely legal and arguably necessary for protecting your investment. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about exercising your legitimate rights as majority shareholder. Leaving Patricia's office, I felt a transformation occurring within me that was both exhilarating and terrifying. For weeks, I'd been the victim in this scenario, the betrayed wife discovering her husband's infidelity. Now, I understood that I'd actually been the person with the most power all along. I just hadn't realized it. The drive back to Westlake Hills gave me time to consider my next moves. Simply destroying Daniel and Veronica's careers would be satisfying, but it wouldn't address the deeper issue of how they'd manipulated and deceived me. I wanted them to understand the full scope of their miscalculation before I revealed my hand. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Sterling Tech's main number and asked to schedule a meeting with Veronica Stone to discuss potential investment opportunities. Using my real name rather than the Unholdings corporate identity, I positioned myself as a successful Central City investor interested in exploring partnership possibilities. Veronica's assistant was immediately accommodating. Stone would be delighted to meet with you Thursday afternoon. Could I provide some background on your investment focus? I gave a carefully edited version of my credentials, emphasizing my portfolio's performance without revealing the full extent of my resources or the fact that I already owned her company. The plan crystallizing in my mind was both simple and devastating. I would meet with Veronica face to face, allowing her to pitch me on investing in the company I already owned, while she conducted an affair with my husband. The irony would be exquisite, and it would give me the opportunity to observe her up close while she remained completely unaware of who I really was. Wednesday evening brought another piece of the puzzle into place when Daniel announced he'd be attending a Sterling Tech team dinner Thursday night. Veronica is treating the senior staff to celebrate the Morrison account's success, he explained with barely contained enthusiasm. Should be a nice evening. Smiled and told him to have fun, knowing that I'd be spending Thursday afternoon in his lover's office while she tried to convince me to invest in her company. The symmetry was almost poetic. Thursday arrived with unseasonably warm weather. That felt appropriate for the confrontation I was orchestrating. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Veronica, choosing a navy blue suit that projected authority without appearing threatening. I wanted to be memorable, but not in a way that would make her suspicious. Sterling Tech's downtown offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower that showcased Veronica's taste for modern aesthetics. The reception area featured abstract art and minimalist furniture that spoke to success and sophistication. It was exactly the kind of environment that would impress potential investors and clients. Veronica's assistant led me to a conference room on the top floor with panoramic views of Central City's skyline. Veronica entered moments later, and I had to admit that seeing her in her professional environment was impressive. She moved with confidence and authority. Every inch the successful CEO who'd transformed her father's company into a regional powerhouse. Ms. Harper, thank you so much for coming in, she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. I understand. You're interested in learning more about Sterling Tech's growth trajectory. Up close, Veronica was even more striking than I'd remembered. From our brief encounter at the networking event, she possessed that rare combination of beauty and intelligence that made her naturally magnetic. I could understand why Daniel had been drawn to her, even as I resented the pain that attraction had caused. I'm always interested in well-managed companies with strong leadership, I replied, settling into the chair across from her. Your reputation in Central City's business community is quite impressive. For the next hour, Veronica walked me through Sterling Tech's business model, financial performance, and expansion plans with the polished expertise of someone who'd given this presentation countless times. She was undeniably brilliant, speaking knowledgeably about market trends, competitive advantages, and strategic opportunities. What fascinated me was how different she seemed in this setting, compared to the woman in those photographs with Daniel. Here, she was entirely professional, focused, and articulate. The persona she projected was of someone completely dedicated to business success, with no hint of the personal complications that were compromising her judgment. Our recent account acquisitions have positioned us for significant growth over the next 18 months, she continued, pulling up financial projections on her laptop. We're particularly excited about our expanded capabilities in digital marketing integration. I asked thoughtful questions about staffing, client retention, and competitive positioning, genuinely curious about how she viewed the company's prospects. Her answers revealed both impressive business acumen and troubling blind spots. She spoke glowingly about Daniel's contributions without any acknowledgement of the ethical issues their relationship created. One of our key advantages is the depth of talent in our marketing team, she said at one point. Our senior marketing director, Daniel Harper, has been instrumental in developing our client acquisition strategy. Its creative vision and strategic thinking have exceeded all expectations. The casual way she mentioned Daniel's name, without any indication that she was discussing my husband or that their relationship extended beyond professional collaboration, was breathtaking in its audacity. She was sitting across from Daniel's wife, praising his professional capabilities while conducting a secret affair with him. Mr. Harper sounds like a valuable asset, I observed, watching her face carefully. It's always impressive when a company can attract and retain top talent. Absolutely, Veronica replied. Daniel brings exactly the kind of innovative thinking that drives sustainable growth. He's become an integral part of our leadership team. The euphemism was particularly galling. Daniel had indeed become integral to Veronica's plans, just not in the way that would benefit Sterling Tech shareholders. I wondered if she genuinely believed her own corporate speak, or if she was simply that comfortable with compartmentalizing her professional and personal motivations. As the meeting continued, I found myself developing a grudging respect for Veronica's business capabilities, even as I planned her professional destruction. She was clearly talented and had genuinely improved Sterling Tech's performance during tons. I saw her down with Spice A. Sassa. Now, we all know I've been exploring that path. I found myself developing a grudging respect for Veronica, which, with Lose, as I sees if I be, as I be, as I see as if I see, as I see, as I see, as we come lee with a sequire says a. We see so well soften can lee, gree with cuff, with see with goy conway, with us see, come you see with sikai, with to come with is, and we see to see to you go kikami, you kai, can you we can see you to see you to sika, can do you to you siki, I could kiki, I cake, I if you can't act, do what I cake, if I would clave you again, with I could kill it with you, kate, just you call it, could that king, got connect the red cock there. Her tenure. Under different circumstances, she might have been exactly the kind of CEO that would maximize my investment returns. But circumstances weren't she chosen to pursue my husband while managing my company, creating conflicts of interest that compromised her effectiveness and threatened the business I'd worked to build. Talent without integrity was ultimately worthless in a leadership position. I'm impressed by what you've accomplished, I said, as our meeting drew to a close. Sterling Tech clearly has strong fundamentals and capable leadership. I'd like to have my team review your materials in more detail before making any investment decisions. Of course, Veronica replied, standing to shake my hand again. I appreciate your interest, and I hope we'll have the opportunity to work together. Companies like Sterling Tech benefit enormously from partnerships with sophisticated investors who understand our industry. The irony of her words was almost overwhelming. She was expressing hope for partnership with an investor who already owned her company and was preparing to use that ownership to end her career. She was praising sophisticated investors while conducting herself in a manner that demonstrated complete disrespect for investor interests. "I'll be in touch soon," I promised, gathering my materials. "You can expect to hear from my representatives." Within the next few days, walking back to my car, I felt the final pieces of my strategy clicking into place. Veronica had given me everything I needed to justify the actions I was planning. Her casual discussion of Daniel's contributions, her obvious pride in their collaboration, her complete lack of awareness about the ethical implications of their relationship, provided perfect documentation of her unfitness for leadership. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing the notes from my meeting while Daniel prepared for his dinner with Veronica's team. The contrast between the professional woman I'd met that afternoon and the scheming seductress revealed in those photographs was remarkable. Veronica was clearly capable of maintaining multiple personas depending on her audience and objectives. But that flexibility was also her weakness. She'd become so comfortable compartmentalizing her various roles that she'd lost sight of how they interconnected. The CEO who'd impressed me with her business acumen was the same woman who was compromising her company's governance standards. The leader who spoke passionately about integrity and performance was conducting an affair that violated both principles. As Daniel kissed me goodbye and headed out for his evening with Veronica, I opened my laptop and began drafting the email that would set everything in motion. Patricia would receive my instructions first thing Friday morning, triggering the legal process that would transform me from anonymous investor to active owner. The game was about to change completely, and neither Daniel nor Veronica had any idea what was coming. They'd built their relationship on the assumption that I was powerless to stop them. Tomorrow, they would begin learning just how catastrophically they'd miscalculated. The anonymous investor they dismissed was about to become the most important person in both their lives. And the revelation would destroy everything they thought they'd built together. Friday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that follows. Decisive action. I had spent the night finalizing my strategy, and by 8 o'clock, I was sitting in Patricia Walsh's office, watching her review the documents that would reshape multiple lives before the day ended. The legal papers were spread across her conference table like battle plans, each one precisely crafted to maximize impact and minimize escape routes. "The board resolution is bulletproof," Patricia confirmed, adjusting her glasses as she examined the final draft. "Veronica Stone's conduct clearly violates multiple provisions in the corporate charter. The documented evidence of favoritism, the hostile work environment complaints, and the inappropriate relationship with a subordinate all constitute grounds for immediate removal." She slid another document across the table. "The financial clawback provisions are equally solid. Based on the timeline we've established, she forfeit approximately $4.2 million in compensation and benefits. The non-compete clause remains in effect for 2 years, essentially barring her from executive positions at any competing firm in Texas." I studied the numbers, struck by how completely financial devastation could reshape someone's life. Veronica had built her lifestyle around CEO-level compensation from her downtown loft to her luxury car payments. The immediate loss of income, combined with the industry blacklisting, would force her to rebuild everything from scratch. "What about Daniel's termination?" I asked. Equally comprehensive, Patricia replied with the satisfaction of a lawyer who'd crafted an airtight case. "Subordinate party in an inappropriate relationship with his supervisor. He's subject to immediate dismissal for cause. No severance package, no benefits continuation. And his non-compete agreement remains fully enforceable. Given sterling tax market position, he'll be effectively locked out of Central City's marketing industry for 18 months minimum." The thoroughness of their professional destruction was breathtaking. Within hours, I could reduce both Daniel and Veronica from successful executives to unemployed pariahs struggling to find work in their chosen fields. The power was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "I want to schedule an emergency board meeting for Monday morning," I decided. But I want Veronica to receive advance notice this afternoon that her performance is under review. She should have the weekend to contemplate what's coming without being able to do anything about it." Patricia nodded approvingly. Psychological pressure is often more effective than immediate action. She'll spend the weekend wondering exactly what we know and how much evidence we've gathered. The timing was deliberately calculated. Today was Friday, and Daniel had mentioned that he and Veronica were planning to attend a company retreat at Hill Country Resort over the weekend. Nothing overtly romantic, just a leadership team strategy session that happened to include only the two of them, their last weekend together before. I destroyed their carefully constructed fantasy. At 10:30. I made the phone call that would begin the final phase of my plan. Using my authority as majority shareholder, I contacted Sterling Tech's board secretary and formally requested an emergency session to address urgent governance issues. The secretary, clearly flustered by the unexpected intervention from the mysterious Unholdings representative, stammered through questions about scheduling and agenda items. Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I stated firmly, "The agenda will focus on executive performance review and potential leadership changes. Ms. Stone should be advised that her employment status will be under discussion." The secretary's sharp intake. A breath was audible through the phone. In 3 years as CEO, Veronica had never faced serious scrutiny from the board. She'd assumed her position was secure, protected by strong financial performance and the absence of any obvious problems. The notification that her job was suddenly in jeopardy would shatter that comfortable assumption. By noon, word of the emergency board meeting had reached Veronica. I knew this because Daniel called me from Sterling Tech's office, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Natalie, something strange is happening at work," he said without preamble. "Veronica just got notification that the board wants to review her performance on Monday. Nobody knows what triggered it or what they're planning to discuss." I injected appropriate concern into my voice. "That does sound unusual. Do you think there's some kind of problem with the company?" "I don't know. Veronica's been an excellent CEO. The financial results speak for themselves." His loyalty to her was touching, if misguided. "She's trying to figure out who called for the review and what their concerns might be." "I'm sure it's just routine corporate governance," I said soothingly. "These things probably happen all the time in successful companies." What Daniel didn't realize was that I could see Veronica's increasingly frantic attempts to gather information playing out in real time. As the majority shareholder, I had access to all corporate communications, including the urgent emails she was sending to board members and legal advisors. Her messages revealed growing desperation as she tried to understand what had triggered the sudden scrutiny. The afternoon brought another delicious moment of irony when Veronica called me directly. Her assistant explained that Ms. Stone wanted to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss the investment opportunity we'd explored the day before. The CEO, who was facing professional catastrophe, was still trying to court the very person orchestrating her downfall. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full next week," I told the assistant. "Perhaps we could reconnect after Ms. Stone has resolved her current business priorities." The polite deflection was calculated to increase Veronica's anxiety without revealing my hand. She would spend the weekend wondering whether the mysterious board review was somehow connected to her failed attempt to secure new investment. The uncertainty would compound her stress and make the eventual revelation even more devastating. That evening, I sat in my home office, monitoring Sterling Tech's internal communications while Daniel packed for his weekend retreat with Veronica. His suitcase lay open on our bed, filled with casual clothes that suggested long walks and intimate conversations rather than business strategy sessions. He was humming softly as he folded shirts, obviously looking forward to uninterrupted time with his lover. "The resort has a spa," he mentioned casually. Veronica thought it would be good for the team to decompress after all the recent stress. The team consisted of exactly 2 people, neither of whom would be decompressing once Monday morning arrived. I watched Daniel select his favorite cologne. It's the one I'd given him for our anniversary 2 years ago, and felt a pang of sadness for what we'd lost. Despite everything, part of me still remembered the man I'd fallen in love with, the ambitious but principled person who'd seemed incapable of this level of betrayal. "That sounds lovely," I said, managing to keep my voice neutral. "You both deserve some time to relax and plan for the future." Daniel kissed me goodbye Saturday morning with the distracted affection of a man whose thoughts were already elsewhere. I watched his car disappear down Cedar Ridge Drive, knowing it would be the last time he left our house as my husband in anything but name. By Monday evening, our marriage would be over in all but the legal formalities. The weekend passed with agonizing slowness as I waited for Monday's confrontation. I spent Saturday reviewing the evidence Patricia had compiled, ensuring that every detail of Veronica and Daniel's misconduct was properly documented. The paper trail was devastating, revealing not just their affair, but the systematic way they'd manipulated Sterling Tech's culture to support their relationship. Sunday brought news that confirmed my suspicions about their retreat. Tommy Chen, our neighbor who served on the board of directors for the Hill Country Resort, mentioned seeing Daniel and Veronica sharing an intimate dinner at the resort's restaurant Saturday night. Their table was secluded, their conversation animated, and their behavior clearly that of lovers rather than colleagues. They seemed very close, Tommy observed with the knowing look of someone who'd witnessed obvious indiscretion. "I hope everything's okay with you and Daniel." The innocent concern in his voice almost made me laugh. Tommy had no idea that his casual observation was providing the final piece of evidence I needed for Monday's board meeting. The weekend retreat that Daniel and Veronica thought was a romantic escape was actually generating documentation of their misconduct that would be used to destroy their careers. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable coolness that felt appropriate for the confrontation ahead. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit that projected authority and professionalism, the armor of a woman prepared for corporate warfare. The reflection staring back at me from the bedroom mirror looked calm and determined, showing no trace of the emotional turmoil that had consumed me just weeks earlier. Patricia met me at Sterling Tech's offices at 8:30, carrying the legal documents that would reshape the company's leadership within the hour. The building's lobby was quiet, with only security guards and cleaning staff present at the early hour. Veronica's executive assistant wouldn't arrive until 9, which gave us time to prepare the conference room and review our strategy one final time. "Remember, you're not Natasha Harper, the betrayed wife, in this room," Patricia advised as we rode the elevator to the executive floor. "You're the majority shareholder of NH Holdings, exercising legitimate oversight of your investment. Motivations are irrelevant to the business case we're presenting." The distinction was crucial, both legally and psychologically. While my actions were motivated by personal betrayal, the justification for Veronica's removal was entirely professional. She'd violated corporate governance standards, created legal liability, and compromised the company's effectiveness. The fact that she'd done it while conducting an affair with my husband was painful irony, not the legal basis for her termination at precisely 9 o'clock. Veronica entered the conference room, expecting a routine board meeting to address whatever mysterious concerns had triggered the emergency session. She was dressed impeccably in a navy blue power suit, her confidence intact despite the weekend's uncertainty. The transformation on her face, when she saw me sitting at the head of the conference table, was worth every moment of planning and preparation. "Ms. Harper," she said, her voice betraying the first hint of confusion. "I wasn't expecting you to be here." "Good morning, Veronica," I replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Please sit down. We have quite a bit to discuss." A few moments were a masterclass in psychological warfare. As Veronica processed the implications of my presence, she glanced at Patricia, noting the legal documents spread across the table, then back at me with growing alarm. The successful CEO who'd spent the weekend planning strategy with my husband was beginning to understand that she'd walked into a trap. "I'm afraid I don't understand," Veronica said, remaining standing despite my invitation. "What exactly is the purpose of this meeting?" "I'm here representing NH Holdings, the majority shareholder of Sterling Tech," I explained calmly. "We've become concerned about certain governance issues that require immediate attention." The color drained from Veronica's face as the full scope of the situation became clear. The woman she'd met with last Thursday, the potential investor she tried to court, was actually the anonymous owner of her company. More devastating still, she was beginning to realize that I might also be connected to Daniel in ways that would make their affair exponentially more dangerous. NH Holdings, she repeated slowly as if testing the words. "You're the majority shareholder." "I am. And you, Ms. Stone, have been managing my company while conducting yourself in a manner that violates multiple provisions of your employment agreement." Patricia opened the first folder and began reading from the documented evidence of Veronica's misconduct, the inappropriate relationship with a subordinate employee, the preferential treatment that created a hostile work environment for other staff members, the use of company resources for personal activities, and the systematic retaliation against employees who might pose competition for Daniel's attention. Each accusation landed like a physical blow, and I watched Veronica's professional composure crumble as she realized the thoroughness of our investigation. The woman who'd projected such confidence and authority during our meeting Thursday was disappearing, replaced by someone who understood that her carefully constructed life was collapsing in real time. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "your conduct has exposed Sterling Tech to significant legal liability. Sexual harassment claims, wrongful termination suits, and discrimination complaints are all foreseeable consequences of the work environment you've created." "This is about Daniel," Veronica said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're Daniel Harper's wife." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Veronica had finally connected the dots between my identity as majority shareholder and my relationship to the married man she'd been seducing. The expression on her face revealed that she understood the full scope of her miscalculation. "Yes, I am," I confirmed. "Though that fact is irrelevant to your employment status. You're being terminated for cause based on documented violations of corporate policy and professional standards." Patricia slid the termination papers across the table, each page detailing the financial consequences of Veronica's removal: the forfeiture of stock options, the clawback of performance bonuses, the enforcement of non-compete clauses. $4.2 million vanishing with a signature. "You can't do this," Veronica protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "The board will never support this." "The board has already been presented with the evidence," I replied. "As majority shareholder, I have the authority to remove executives for cause. Your conduct clearly meets that standard." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes as Patricia methodically dismantled every aspect of Veronica's professional life. Security would escort her from the building immediately. Her company equipment would be confiscated. Her access to Sterling Tech's facilities and systems would be terminated within the hour. But the final blow was yet to come. As Veronica signed the termination documents with shaking hands, I delivered the news that would complete her destruction. "And Veronica," I said as she prepared to leave, "Daniel Harper's employment was also terminated this morning. He's being escorted from the building as we speak." The sound Veronica made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her lover and her career had been eliminated simultaneously by the woman they'd both dismissed as irrelevant. The anonymous investor she'd never bothered to identify had destroyed everything she'd worked to build. As security arrived to escort Veronica from Sterling Tech's offices for the final time, I felt the weight of months of betrayal finally lifting from my shoulders. Justice had been served with surgical precision, and the people who'd underestimated me would spend years reckoning with the consequences of their arrogance. The game was over, and I had won completely than either Daniel or Veronica could have imagined. The aftermath of Veronica's termination spread through Sterling Tech like wildfire. Within hours, news of the CEO's sudden departure was circulating among employees, clients, and competitors throughout Central City's business community. The official statement cited governance concerns and strategic differences with the board. But the speed and finality of the action suggested something far more serious than routine corporate disagreement. I remained at Sterling Tech's offices through the afternoon, working with the interim management team to ensure operational continuity. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now openly managing the company I'd been secretly funding for 3 years. Employees who'd never heard of NH Holdings suddenly found themselves reporting to representatives of their mysterious majority shareholder. Daniel's termination had been handled with equal efficiency. Security had escorted him from the building while he was still trying to process Veronica's dismissal. According to the reports I received, he'd been stunned into silence, barely managing to collect his personal belongings before being permanently barred from the premises. The golden boy who'd thrived under Veronica's protection was now just another terminated employee with no prospects and diminishing options. The financial markets reacted swiftly to the leadership change. Sterling Tech's stock price fluctuated wildly as investors tried to assess the implications of sudden management upheaval. Industry analysts began speculating about the mysterious circumstances surrounding Veronica's departure, with some suggesting potential scandal or misconduct. The company's reputation, carefully built over years of success, was now tainted by questions about its former leadership. Marcus Reynolds arrived at Sterling Tech's offices Tuesday morning to help navigate the transition. As my partner in Coastal Capital, he'd been briefed on the situation but not the personal details that had motivated my actions. His focus was entirely on protecting our investment and maintaining the company's value during the leadership crisis. The board needs to announce permanent leadership as soon as possible, Marcus advised during our strategy session. Uncertainty about management direction is killing our market position. I agree, I replied, reviewing the candidate profiles human resources had compiled. But we need someone with unquestionable integrity and no connections to the previous administration. The emphasis on integrity wasn't lost on Marcus, though he was diplomatic enough not to probe the underlying reasons for Veronica's removal. Corporate governance violations could encompass everything from financial impropriety to ethical lapses, and experienced investors learned not to ask too many questions about internal company politics by Wednesday. The full scope of Veronica's financial losses had become clear. The clawback provisions in her contract were more extensive than she'd realized, covering not only recent bonuses but also stock options and deferred compensation. Dating back to her appointment as CEO, her downtown loft, purchased with anticipated earnings that would never materialize, was already listed for sale at a significant loss. Daniel's situation was equally dire. His termination for cause meant no severance package and no benefits continuation. Non-compete clause that had seemed like a minor contract detail was now a career-ending restriction that prevented him from working for any Sterling Tech competitor in Texas for 18 months. Combined with his reputation as someone who'd been terminated for misconduct, his employment prospects in Central City's tight-knit marketing community were virtually non-existent. The personal consequences of their affair were becoming as devastating as the professional ones. Veronica and Daniel's relationship, which had thrived on shared success and mutual ambition, was now anchored in mutual failure and recrimination. The stress of simultaneous career destruction was testing whatever genuine feelings had existed between them. I learned about their deteriorating relationship through Rachel Kim, who'd heard about their very public argument at a downtown bar Friday evening. Apparently, Daniel had been drinking heavily and loudly blaming Veronica for their predicament, claiming she'd promised him their relationship would be kept confidential. Veronica had responded with equal venom, suggesting that Daniel had been naive to think their affair wouldn't eventually have consequences. They're destroying each other as efficiently as they destroyed their careers, Rachel observed during our lunch meeting. Though I have to say, watching karma work this precisely is somewhat satisfying. Rachel had been privy to my strategy. From the beginning, though she'd maintained professional distance from the corporate aspects of my revenge. As a divorce attorney, she understood that personal vengeance and business decisions needed to remain legally separate even when they serve the same ultimate purpose. "How are you handling all this?" she asked. The satisfaction of winning doesn't always compensate for the pain of what came before. The question forced me to confront emotions I'd been avoiding during the intense focus of recent weeks. The victory was complete and satisfying, but it couldn't erase the fact that my marriage was over and my trust had been permanently damaged. Daniel's betrayal had revealed character flaws that made reconciliation impossible, regardless of the consequences he was now facing. "I'm processing it," I admitted. "The anger is fading, but it's being replaced by something more complicated. Relief, maybe? Or clarity about who I really am when I'm not trying to be someone's supportive spouse." The transformation I'd undergone during this ordeal extended far beyond my response to Daniel's infidelity. Taking active control of Sterling Tech had awakened aspects of my personality that had been dormant during years of playing a supporting role in Daniel's career. I discovered that I enjoyed corporate leadership and strategic decision-making in ways that managing my investment portfolio from behind the scenes had never satisfied. By the following Monday, Sterling Tech had stabilized under interim management, and the board had approved my recommendation for a permanent CEO, Susan Martinez. A veteran executive with an impeccable reputation and no connections to the previous administration would take over immediately. Her first priority would be rebuilding the company's culture and eliminating the toxic dynamics that Veronica's leadership had created. The employee satisfaction surveys we conducted revealed the extent of the problems. Veronica's affair with Daniel had caused multiple staff members reported feeling demoralized by the obvious favoritism and concerned about the ethics of senior leadership. Several talented employees had been actively seeking other opportunities, and 2 had already submitted resignations. Before Veronica's termination was announced, Susan's appointment was universally welcomed by Sterling Tech staff. Her reputation for fairness and professionalism offered hope that the company could move beyond the damage caused by Veronica's misconduct. More importantly, her external perspective would help identify and correct systemic issues that might have contributed to the governance failures. The broader Central City business community took longer to process the implications of Veronica's dramatic fall from grace. She had been seen as a rising star, someone whose success represented the new generation of corporate leadership. Her termination for ethical violations sent shock waves through professional networks where she'd been considered a role model. Daniel's professional reputation suffered even more severely, while Veronica could potentially rebuild her career in another market. Daniel's termination as the subordinate party in an inappropriate relationship carried additional stigma. The perception was that he'd advanced through personal relationships, rather than merit a career poison that would follow him regardless of geography. 3 weeks after the terminations, received an unexpected phone call from Daniel. His voice sounded hollow, stripped of the confidence and enthusiasm that had characterized our conversations during happier times. "Natalie, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "I know what you did, and I understand why you did it, but we need to discuss our future, whatever that might look like." I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop in South Central City neutral territory where we could have a conversation without the weight of our shared history overwhelming the discussion. When I arrived, Daniel was already seated at a corner table, looking older and more worn than I'd ever seen him. The man who'd thrived on success and recognition was learning to navigate failure and rejection. "You destroyed both our careers," he said without accusation, just stating a fact. Veronica figured out that you were NH Holdings about a week ago. She's been trying to find legal grounds to challenge the termination, but your lawyer was thorough. Patricia is very good at what she does, I replied, sitting across from him, though the terminations were based on documented misconduct, not personal revenge. The results are the same either way. Daniel stared into his coffee cup. I lost everything: my job, my reputation, any chance of working in Central City's marketing industry. Veronica is already talking about moving to Denver or Seattle to start over. The mention of Veronica's relocation plans didn't surprise me. A geographic fresh start was probably her only option for rebuilding her career, though the circumstances of her departure from Sterling Tech would follow her regardless of location. Corporate governance violations were matters of public record, and executive recruiters conducted thorough background checks. What did you want to discuss about our future? I asked. I want to apologize, Daniel said, finally meeting my eyes. The apology came not because I think it will change anything, but because you deserve to hear it. I was selfish and cruel, he confessed. And I destroyed something good because I was flattered by attention from someone I thought was more important than you. His apology was more sincere than I expected, though it came far too late to undo the damage he'd caused. Daniel was learning humility through the consequences of his actions, rather than through genuine remorse. It made his apology feel more like regret for getting caught than a true acknowledgement of his failures. I appreciate the apology, I replied, carefully, but it doesn't change the fundamental issue. You chose to betray our marriage, and I chose to protect my business interests. Both decisions have consequences we have to live with. I know, Daniel nodded. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I lost, and it wasn't just my career. We spoke for another half hour about the practicalities of our divorce proceedings. Rachel had prepared detailed documentation that safeguarded my business interests, while ensuring Daniel had basic financial support during his transition period. I wasn't vengeful enough to leave him destitute, but I wasn't generous enough to fund his fresh start either. As we were getting ready to leave, Daniel asked one final question that showed how completely he'd misunderstood our relationship. Did you always have this much power? He asked. The ability to destroy careers and reshape companies. Was I married to someone I never really knew? The question forced me to reflect on how much of myself I had hidden during our marriage, not through deliberate deception, but through his lack of interest in understanding my professional capabilities. Daniel had been content to see me as his supportive wife with a nice career, never bothering to investigate the full scope of my business activities. I've always been exactly who I am, I replied. You've just never bothered to pay attention. 6 months later, Sterling Tech's performance had returned to pre-crisis levels under Susan Martinez's leadership. The company's reputation had recovered and employee satisfaction scores were higher than they'd been in years. The toxic culture Veronica's affair had created was replaced by professional standards that prioritized merit over personal relationships. Veronica had indeed relocated to Denver, where she was reportedly working as a consultant, trying to rebuild her career. The $4 million in forfeited compensation had forced her to downsize her lifestyle dramatically, though she was young enough to potentially recover financially, given time and better judgment. Daniel had found work with a small marketing firm in Houston, a significant step down from his previous position, but enough to support himself while serving out his non-compete period. He was living in a modest apartment and driving a used car, learning to navigate middle-class financial reality after years of an executive-level lifestyle. As for me, I discovered an unexpected satisfaction in taking a more active role in Coastal Capital's portfolio management. The experience of directly managing Sterling Tech during the transition had revealed capabilities I'd never fully explored. Marcus and I were considering expanding our hands-on approach to other investments, using our combined expertise to drive performance improvements rather than simply providing capital. The anonymity that had once protected my privacy was no longer necessary or desirable. I'd learned that stepping out of the shadows and taking direct action could be far more effective than operating behind the scenes. The mysterious investor persona had served its purpose, but the woman who'd emerged from Daniel's betrayal was someone altogether more formidable. Looking back on the entire ordeal, I realized that Daniel and Veronica had actually done me a favor, though certainly not intentionally. Their affair had forced me to confront the limitations I'd accepted in both my marriage and my career. The process of destroying their carefully constructed deception had revealed strengths and capabilities I'd never fully utilized. The anonymous investor who'd once been content to remain hidden had become a woman willing to step into the light and claim the power she'd always possessed. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just getting even, but discovering who you really are when you stop letting others define your worth.